Okay, good evening everybody. My name's Richard A. Jones and I'm going to be talking about vocal production. It's the thing that I do the most in my music and my songwriting and everything. So I thought, I go through the history and evolution of it and all the equipment that goes with it and a little bit about what I do at the end. So without further ado, microphone brief and the art. I want you all to think of it in a sort of more philosophical way. It's very hippie, very sort of non-technical stuff. It's design and purpose. Well, the microphone itself was designed around 1840, which is a really, really long time ago. The principle was there. But it wasn't until 1876 and 1877 when they were trying to make telephones, to improve the communication between all of us, that they stumbled across the microphone and they sort of came up with the tinfoil phonograph, which is basically a recording instrument. You could record into the tinfoil, and then immediately it could play it back. And at the time, that was sort of, space odyssey sort of thing. It was great at the time, and without this, none of what we do today could be possible, really. That's why I've put the co-revolution of music technology, because these guys, the ones that invented these, Emil Berliner, etc., were the dudes. They were the guys that led the way to the crazy world of recording. Can anyone tell me, by reading that quote, what they can interpret it as? I'll read it out to you. It's, art serves as communication for the improvement of social relationships through greater understanding of human experience. Can anyone tell me what that means slightly?
Art, you can, purvey your emotions and stuff, and then people can understand it from the art,
Yeah,
a great
exactly.
painting, people can take many different things from it.
That's exactly what it is. Pretty much art as a whole, and modern day society, etc., serves as means of communication. It doesn't matter what you speak, it doesn't matter what culture you are, art is art, and it communicates to all of us. So music is super, super important. And therefore it's only appropriate that the microphone came from the invention of the telephone. Telephone is a means of communication, microphone also a means of communication, but just a more artful way of doing it. With the evolution of the whole music industry came about radio broadcasting, 1930s, etc., but at the time they were using carbon microphones. Can't pronounce the word. And it was very sort of, it was just a very bad noise, it wasn't great. So therefore this led on to an evolution of microphones. Everyone thought, we need a better microphones to communicate to people through radio. So they came up with, the first one was a condenser microphone. As you all know, you're all very familiar with condenser microphones. They need power to be supplied with. Preamps and all that kind of stuff, which were very hard to find at the time. So this wasn't acceptable. So the problems with it were pretty big. They were very clear. They were very sort of when you got it going. They were very clear, very good. But if you have to get past that point of the energy supply. Dynamic microphones also came about, and it's probably the most important invention for the Americans in terms of microphone, because it's ever since the 1920s, 1930s, it's still used today, and it's still very, very reliable for performances and recording. But at the time, 1920s and 1930s, the ribbon microphone was actually the microphone of choice, the really favorite one, because of its sort of smooth, recording of it. It was very round, and at the time, 1920s and 1930s, you had a lot of crooners, what we call crooners, Bing Crosby, Judy Garland, etc., and they all wanted to emit warm tones to their voice, warm feelings across their music. So the ribbon microphone came just right on time for what people wanted at the time. Conventional versus unconventional, and through the ages. As I said, the evolution of microphones just came about with the radio broadcasting and moving pictures, etc., so therefore, as more microphones came along, more conventional and unconventional styles of recording were explored. I'm a firm believer that unconventional, styles should be explored, and I try my best to search up unconventional styles or even make up my own, to record interesting sounds, interesting vocals, interesting everything really. Put a few pictures up. I'll explain a little bit about them. Elvis Presley, very, very famous hound dog, used a ribbon microphone, and it's quite funny the way they recorded it, because at the time they didn't use separation and isolation on, separating the singer from the band. So I'll show you in a little bit actually. You can clearly hear the level difference between him and the band. You can hear that in the band, everything's leaking in, bleeding in, and creeping up like guitars and into the drum microphone, etc., etc. And you can hear that the levels between him and the harmony guys is just really, really noticeable. That's because all of them are probably, crowded around this one mic, whereas he had his own mic. But they were all in the same room, a really big reverb effective room. And yeah, it wasn't until the 1960s that the dynamic microphone came about. Anything pre-Beatles was ribbon, and then after Beatles, dynamics. Just people wanted more in-your-face style recordings, more bright and stuff. My favorite picture there is probably David Bowie though, because he used very, very unconventional styles of recording. He recorded with a dynamic microphone directly from an amp. He would sing into the amp, whatever was coming out of the amp, that's what he would record. And it would give really sort of punchiness to it, very bright, but also very aggressive. And it was really, really cool. Michael Jackson actually recorded with an SM7B, which Josh mentioned, and I really want to get my hands on one because it's actually a radio mic. It's a radio broadcasting mic, and he used it for the whole of Thriller, and it sounds brilliant. So 1950s. So this is the time that the crooners were about and all that kind of stuff. And I just like to show you this graph about sort of the frequencies, about the recordings. I think this part right here, where it goes up a little bit, is due to the recent mastering. So I doubt that the it's as high in the original recordings, because the energy levels just weren't great, especially if you have two mics and stuff like that. But yeah, I'll have a little sound of Elvis Presley. You can really hear that Elvis Presley is right there on his own mic, whereas the band had their own, probably one or two more mics. So they're really pushed back, but nevertheless they're all in the same room. And at the time, there was no comping, there was no nothing like that. It was just record, go, do it from beginning to end. And that's why they're geniuses, because they could just perform it perfectly on the one go. That's very rare that you see that nowadays. Very, very rare that you find a whole recording done from one take. 1960s to 1970s. Now, the frequencies here have gone up even more, creating a sort of unnatural tones to the voices and tones to the whole recordings in general, especially with Led Zeppelin. Influenced by the 60s psychedelia and all that kind of stuff, the frequencies, were up and down, especially on this section right here with the 300, 500 hertz. It would create a really unnatural sound to the voices, which everyone really wanted. By this time also, the ribbon microphones were